All right, joining us now. He's the traveling man. He's been everywhere. He was in Kansas City last weekend. He was in Wichita earlier this week for AUX. He has now made his way to Chattanooga as well, covering softball there. And then all in between, he's breaking news and everything. And of course, that is D1 softball's very own Justin McLeod. Man, it's how are you doing? That's maybe the first question.
Don't sleep much, but what else
No,
is new?
no. First of all, we'll get to why you're in Chattanooga a little bit. You're there to catch some softball as we're recording this. We're recording this at Wednesday, 5 o'clock. You're heading out to the stadium to catch some softball a little bit, and then you got more softball later this week. Let's start with that.
Yeah, I'm in Chattanooga for a combination of the Scenic City Collegiate League, the Scenic City Travel Ball Tournament, and the Scenic City Champions Cup, the pro round robin with the OKC Spark, the Florida Vibe, the Rise out of New York, New Jersey, and the Chattanooga Steam. So I'm hitting three different levels of softball, bam, 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 all in one 5 day, same week period.
That's incredible. We're going to talk more about that with Kaylin Arnold on the podcast. For those listening on the podcast, that's coming up later on that. But the reason I only bring that up is because the man is short on time, so we're going to get right to it. Uh, and ask you about, obviously Monday was a really busy day for you, and it had
Yeah.
nothing to do with you being at AUX because you got to break a couple of big stories that really was certainly caught people's attentions in a lot of ways. Let's start with the one that certainly first one in chronological order, and that's Nijaree Canady entering the portal. You reported that she officially entered the portal. There have been rumors and reports over the weekend that she was going to. There was a Kansas TV station that reported that and all that. But you actually got to be the first to report the fact she officially entered the portal. Where, from your perspective, what was your reaction as you obviously was getting in, I'm sure, fed and people reaching out to you that this was going to happen or is going to happen? What was going through your mind? And then once it officially, hey, she's in the portal now.
I mean, it was a badly kept rumor for a minute, just because it's the day and age in which we live. The portal is an ever present thing, and so it was something that kind of gone around and all that. Actually, funnily enough, over the course of the weekend, I was in Kansas City for the Top Gun Invitational, not far from Nijaree Canady's own home, which just kind of a fun little coincidence. But so it was out there over the course of the weekend. A news reporter from, I believe it was Topeka, confirmed it with a family source. So at that point, it's a waiting game. At that point, it's okay. Well, we know she's going, but when type of deal. Um, so I mean, once she went in, the actual entrance was not a surprise to me. She went in with a no con without a do not contact, which is what I expected. That I didn't expect
You
her to go in.
highlighted that though. You did highlight that and made a
Well,
reference on that.
it's an important distinction because a do not contact means she knows where she's going and who she wants to hear from, versus the lack of a do not contact, as in her case, means you can hear from anybody. You can hear from the whole country if they want to reach out. Um, so that was an important distinction, but I expected her to go in exactly like she did. The timing was about on par with what I expected. Um, I think for me, maybe the biggest thing was I think maybe the biggest thing was just okay, she's actually in. Like that's the biggest star to ever go in the portal. With apologies to Jordy Ball and now her silver medal in that category. Nijaree Canady is the biggest softball star to go into the transfer portal since the transfer portal became a thing. So I think that was the biggest piece of it, just the wow, it actually happened. And then knowing what that means across the board in terms of a lot of different things, just the magnitude of what her going in means. I think that was probably the biggest piece once she actually did go in.
Significant. It got a lot of people talking. Now, it's worth mentioning as we record this again, Wednesday, 5:09 Eastern Time. There's been no official comments from Nijaree Canady or anybody there. No comments from Stanford. Anything like that. It's all quiet there. I think you and I agree that we expect that to stay that way, right? We don't expect to hear from any of those parties about this at all, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what my thought is on it. I don't expect to see anything.
Okay, yeah, because sometimes you know how it is. Sometimes players may announce something on Instagram, maybe come out with a
Yeah.
goodbye. They'll, you mentioned Jordy Ball. She came out with basically, "Hey, it's been great" and all that. And of course, and then that was different because everybody kind of knew, okay, you're going home. You're
Yeah.
going to go to Nebraska. This one, though, it's created a polarizing conversation, which we're not going to get into. Everybody's got their opinions on it. How many? Let me ask you this: how many athletes and players, softball players, ended up entering the transfer portal? Monday was the deadline. Now it is worth mentioning because some people may not be aware of this. If your head coach leaves for another job, you could still enter the portal, even though the deadline has passed. That is a wrinkle that some people forget sometimes. So just because the deadline was Monday, let's say there's a head coaching change or whatever down the road, and this is softball after all. And as we've learned, there's those that say anytime you could always see players enter the portal. You're like, wait a minute, I thought the deadline. So that's why. So keep that in mind. But
Good
as
point.
of after Monday, how many players, Justin, has now entered the portal for this season?
I believe we're up over 800 at this point.
800.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's not. It's both a large number and maybe not as large as some might think. Um, but I know at last check we were either getting close to or right around 800, and I expect us to probably be at 800 by the end of the summer. Like you mentioned, if there's a head coaching change, there's a window specific to players on that team. Grad transfers can still go in, things like that. So, but at last check we were right, just under, right around 800.
Yeah. Which feels like slightly down, right? Haven't we been in the thousands in the past?
We've
Or
gotten into
close?
that number before,
Yeah.
yeah. I think the biggest thing about this is just the fact that the window is kind of people are realizing that the window makes a difference now, things like that. But also, just I think that um, I don't think you see as many kids transferring. Like, yeah, as much as it seems like it's so many and it's a lot and all that, I also don't think you see as many for a multitude of reasons. So, yeah, I mean, little down, but still a pretty high number.
Now, everybody's got their thoughts about it, whether, all that stuff. What I found interesting, you were asked to come on with Dusty Dvorak and Danny Cannell, which is a sports radio show on a Sirius XM. You've been on there before. But that's a sports show. That is not a softball show. You've also been doing some other shows, softball podcast shows, other shows as well. But that one is national. I'm more interested in the non-softball reaction because the softball fan audience reaction, they're always going to react to it both positively and negatively, and that is certainly the case with this situation. I'm curious from a non-softball standpoint, what was their reaction? Because they obviously had you to talk about this. What were some of the things they were curious about that they asked you about? Because I'm always interested in the non-softball fan, because there has been some traction with this one in particular with the non-softball media.
Well, I don't think it's an accident that Kennedy going in the portal is such an across the board notable thing. The two things that I remember that were most interesting to me from Cannell and Dvorak, who are former college football players, college football analysts, like, but they understand the college sports landscape as a whole. Was this kind of fleshes out, the portal is a big deal in softball. It's some sports that aren't football and basketball maybe don't make the mainstream as much with portal stuff, but it's a big deal in softball. So is NIL. I mean, I think we all understand that Nijaree Canady, wherever she winds up, is headed for a pretty massive NIL payout. So I think that's part of it too. Um, those were the two big things. It's really just increasing the notoriety of where some of these things that affect college sports as a whole actually do play into softball. I don't think that's an accident. I don't think that's a small thing. Um, and that's something that stood out that we talked about on Cannell and Dvorak was kind of in that category. Um, just the impacts of the portal on softball, Kennedy leading the way, kind of making people realize, oh hey, NIL same category. So that was a big piece of it, and something that stood out to me just from the non everyday softball person, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued. And look, this is college sports. This is not just a softball thing. I mean, in college sports, I was listening to Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander, or as I call Matt, the Justin McLeod of college basketball. They do their own college basketball podcast, and they were talking about this basketball player that's transferring from Illinois to Kansas State for $2 million in NIL money. So, are we just naive to not assume like, oh, like NIL is a game changer? And I'm going to get into this more with Kaylin Arnold, who's actually entered the portal, knows the experience. But they didn't have NIL when she entered the portal the year that her and Samantha Shao did. Uh, this is what everybody's doing, and whether people like it or don't like it, it is a part of the landscape now in college athletics, and it does feel weird to be critical of a young person to be going after, if that's what she is. We don't know, as we mentioned, but I would assume that's going to play a factor in this. But it is funny. I mean, we have a bunch of schools in about a week or two do their own portal by entering new conferences. Coaches leave all the time, so this is just the landscape. That's why I'll give you credit to this. You're not as surprised by these moves anymore as others are. Like, I was surprised when I saw it, but you were not, because this is kind of the landscape that we're in now, isn't it?
Yeah, this is just where we are at this point. It's a you gotta I'm not going to say adapt or die by any means, but it's kind of that same idea. You have to be able to adapt to stuff. Nothing surprises me anymore. Just nature of the business, nature of the profession. Nothing surprises me anymore.
You're well connected in the sport. What was the reaction that you've gotten since the news came out of her being in the portal? Was it because I'm always I'm sure you got a little bit like I did. You got a lot of differences of emotional reactions to it, I would assume.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, a lot of people do have feel like it's a foregone conclusion that she goes to Oklahoma. Some people, hey, she's a great player. If players are going to get paid, the best player in the sport ought to get paid. So it's definitely a mixed bag of responses. I think at the end of the day, I don't know how many people were actually surprised by it because again, it's where we are in the sport in the
Yeah.
college sports world nowadays. But it was definitely a mixed bag of responses from people around the sport in different positions and such.
Well, let's get into the on the field stuff, which it's funny nobody talks about. Because look, at the bottom line, until she makes her decision, there's no more added to the story, and then people will react whatever decision she makes, and that's just the way it is. So I'm curious because I know Cannell. I believe Cannell. When I listened to Diverge, kind of asked you about this. You mentioned it. I think a lot of people believe Oklahoma is the favorite. I think did they not ask you too about like would you pick Oklahoma or the field? And it's well documented about Oklahoma's NIL money and the impact that they have and all that stuff. That being said, you mentioned this. This is a once in a lifetime player. Isn't this a player that if you're a non, let's take Oklahoma to a side. We know they're going to be in the mix. But if you're in the SEC, all I keep hearing about in the SEC, it just means more. They have a very good, attractive media rights deal. So they're not crying poverty over there. I don't want to hear it from them. Shouldn't there be some SEC schools here that say this is a difference maker?
No, for sure. I mean, the kicker is Oklahoma is probably the easy odds-on favorite, I think, to everyone. At the same time, though, I don't think they're an automatic because there are other schools that can put together a nice NIL package that certainly have a team that you add a player like Nijaree Canady to, and they're the quality of being championship favorites. Um, like Oklahoma's not the only team in that category, and so I think too that's why we're sitting here at this point, and I think that's why we're sitting here at this point. And yeah, people assume, sure, she's going to go to Oklahoma, yada, yada, yada. But it's not an absolute. It's not a foregone conclusion. Like, I think there's still going to be other players in that category.
All right, we got time. I'm sure this will. We don't expect this to be a quick decision either. I think this. I would like to think this will be usually take your time and it's a big decision. So
Yeah.
I have a feeling this won't be the last time this will be approached. You'll be asked about it. But I do want to ask you about other stuff, and I know you're short on time. I want to ask you about your other big story that came Monday night, which actually got me a wow when I saw it, and that was Stephanie Van Brakel leaving the Memphis head coaching job to become the pitching coach at Florida, back in the SEC, going to Florida, the rivalry. Holy macro. You got to break this. You were the first to break this story on Monday night. Caught a lot of people to talk about that topic in particular. What can you tell us about this story?
Well, I think, Stephanie Van Brickle was a pretty excellent pitching coach at Alabama. You look at some of the players and the pitchers who came through the bullpen at Bama, Montana Fouts, Little John Traina, Osorio, even Leslie Jury for a year was real good. So I think it's one of those things where um, that's her sweet spot. I think it's pretty clear that's her sweet spot. Van Brakel's had tremendous success in the SEC in that category. So the that's just kind of stepping back into a role she had for so long. It's not her alma mater anymore, which is probably going to be interesting the next time Alabama and Florida play. But yeah, I think she fits in well. And I think for Tim Walton, when your pitching coach decides, okay, family time most is what's the top of my list of relevant and important reasons. Okay, now he needs to fill the role for the second time in 2 years. It doesn't surprise me at all that he's going to go out and get somebody with the pedigree that Van Brakel has. Her head coaching record at Memphis was not great. It wasn't very good at all. But she's a great pitching coach. Like she's a pretty celebrated pitching coach, and nobody can deny that. So I think for Tim Walton, go out, you hit a home run. What's not to love?
It is amazing, and we wish, by the way, Chelsea Dobbins very well. You mentioned in the story she's stepping down for family reasons, so we hope for her the best. This is official. Florida has come out with this on Wednesday officially, the Van Brakel story. But if you followed Justin, you would have known about it on Monday with all the details there. Fascinating though, Stephanie Van Brakel there at Florida. This is the second head coach this offseason that has left a head coaching job for an assistant job in the SEC. Craig Snyder left Texas Tech, along with now his official wife, Stephanie Sanders. Both are now at Tennessee to be assistants there. What was your reaction to Snyder and obviously Stephanie Sanders? That's a factor in all this. Joining the Tennessee staff, they take over for the Malvos. We'll get to them in a minute. But your reaction to that move with Craig now as the hitting coach at Tennessee?
I mean, a surprise for sure. It does give Sanders and Snyder a chance to coach together, which I know was something that I had heard about and that they wanted to be able to do. Um, I mean, it's a home run for Karen Weekly. I mean, I think it's probably one of those things where you probably think, yeah, it's not possible, and it turns out it is, and it's like, oh, well, it's a shoe in. It's an easy one then. Like I think it's great actually. I really do. Snyder's a really, really darn good hitting coach. And you look at where he got Texas Tech in the matter of a couple of years, that's no small feat. So I think that's one of those things. I think it's a home run for Weekly. I think it's a home run for Tennessee, possibly literally by the end of it. Um, but I think at the end of the day, I really do think it's a really nice move on both sides. Snyder knows the SEC, knows his way around it, um, and so I think it's one of those things where it's a win for all involved, especially the hitters at Rocky Top.
People have asked me this. I'll ask you this. Who do you think has a bigger impact, Snyder to Tennessee or Van Brakel to Florida?
Um, that's interesting actually because I think both are stepping into situations where it could be really interesting. I'm gonna say it's tough. I'm gonna say Van Brakel, if only because Rothrock is going into her sophomore year. Ava Brown is going into her sophomore year and wasn't the superstar that she could have been in year one. And then Kara Hammock, the transfer coming in from UNC Wilmington, now is facing SEC. You've got Olivia Miller there, you've got a freshman coming in. I think that staff, even as good as Rothrock was, I think that staff is in a position to still have room to grow. Um, so does Tennessee's offense, obviously, but I think that staff just by nature of what they are, young pitchers, new pitchers, whatever it is, I think there's more room to grow there immediately. So I'm going to go Van Brakel by a slight margin, but based on that.
Of course, Snyder takes over for Chris Malvo with his wife, Kate Malvo. They're become co-head coaches at Auburn. We haven't had you on since all this came out even during the World Series time period. What was your reaction to Auburn going with the Malvos there? Since then, they've made a hires with Riker Chasen to be the pitching coach there as well, and DJ Sanders, I think, is joining the staff as I believe as well. So, your reaction on the moves from Auburn?
I think, Chris Malvo's name has gone around and he'll be a head coach at some point, so to speak, circles for a while now. So it doesn't surprise me. I think it's a solid move given where they were in the search and things like that, what they wanted, what they prioritized. Malrose were at Tennessee. Chris is pretty well renowned as a hitting coach. So I think it's pretty solid. Given what Auburn wanted and what they had to be able to get and things like that, I don't think it's a bad move. Um, they're walking into a situation that's going to take some work after the portal and graduation, things like that. But the thing about it is the Malvos are known to be able to work. So maybe it's another one that everybody all around is going to be hard for a minute, but maybe it's going to work out.
Very interesting there. So the
Yeah.
Malvos there, the head coach at Auburn, and then kind of a surprise, maybe some to surprise to some, but who knows? South Carolina parting
Mhm.
ways with Beverly Smith on a Saturday a couple weeks ago. Ashley Chastain, the alum, comes home to be the new head coach at South Carolina. She's bringing her staff with her, which includes Katie Rickovic, who's back in the SEC. Obviously, he's played in the SEC, was an assistant in the SEC. Um, I guess it was an interesting though, just how Ray Tanner kind of did this. This was on the same week when Ray Tanner hired his baseball coach Paul Maneri, which was a big news in college baseball. That certainly our colleagues at Kendall Rogers at D1 Baseball, they've been covering that angle. But it was a busy time for Ray Tanner. He got rid of Mark Kingston, and and certainly parted ways there with Bev around the same time frame, and then brought in big names here with Maneri and then the alum in Chastain.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Actually, there was four head coaches hired together, including golf and equestrian too. And I'm like, Ray Tanner worked real quick and to keep all that in one place, bam, Board of Regents, bam, 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 here we go. Um, so I mean, no, I mean, it was one of those. The Bev Smith hiring, the firing, the timing of it was unexpected for sure. But I mean, once it happened, I think Ashley Chastain was the obvious shoe in. She's just up the road at Charlotte. Charlotte's had great success. Now you see most of Charlotte's team in the portal, some with do not contact designations as soon as they go in. I think there's 9 players who've entered since the coaching change was made. So we'll see what ends up happening with all that. But I think that was the obvious move from a hiring standpoint. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of new faces around that Columbia at this point.
There is a lot of new faces
It's a
there.
lot.
That's a lot of it. I'm surprised you didn't break the equestrian coach news. There's scoop there on there. Boy, you bring that up. I mean, that has become another trend that teams that get, I don't want to say gutted, but we've seen that with Charlotte. We saw that a bunch of Washington players leaving that program. Now we're starting to see some of them where they're landing, and we're seeing Oregon State had a lot. I mean, it's wild, man. College athletics 2024. Welcome it, whether you like it or not. This is where we're at, Justin, and I think that's kind of
Mm.
it is what it is, and certainly we'll follow all of this. Follow D1 softball. We got a transfer tracker. Thank God, because I wouldn't be able to keep track with all this. And there's a coaching carousel. Your phone won't stop but
No.
it blowing up. You're still traveling,
Yep.
but you're going to be giving us some content from Chattanooga. Tell us a little bit what it's also coming up confined on D1 softball.
Well, we're gonna do some content from all 3 different levels over here. Little bit of some travel ball in there. Some of those players that you're going to see in college in the next couple of years that are signed and committed and things like that. Get to know some of those players a little bit. Some of the players in college playing in the college summer leagues here and then elsewhere. Do some get to knows on them as well. Just kind of the players that a little different stage than maybe what you're used to seeing during the course of the regular season. And then there's plenty of pro teams and plenty of former college athletes now playing pro. We'll have some content on them too. So just a little bit of everything. Just a little bit of everything.
And folks, we promise we'll have Justin back on down the road. We'll go more in depth on all the moves this offseason. We weren't planning on doing this. Seriously, we were not planning on doing this, but news warranted to have you on. I have a feeling you'll be back on. You've been on here a few times before.
I have.
That's pretty good. All right, enjoy Chattanooga there, Justin. We look forward to the coverage from there, and thanks for taking the time here on short notice on a very busy week and a busy time in the sport. Thanks for doing it, and obviously everybody keep it on here on D1 Softball.